Scary. Good. Welcome to Scary Stories NYC's President's Day special on the Scary Good channel. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. For all you Madeline Starr fans, don't worry. She's taking more time off for her birthday and she'll be back the next Scary Stories episode. For this show, we've got the strangest collection of cryptid stories ever, and we've got two great guys to tell them to you. First of all, PQ Ribber returns as Dr. Death, but if you stay tuned, you'll also experience a story about a Massachusetts cryptid read by none other than the king of pop culture himself, Gary Sohmers. Gary is the guy from Antiques Roadshow that owns and runs the Northeast Comic-Con that I'm appearing at on St. Patrick's Day weekend, along with actual celebrities like Gilbert Gottfried. Gary's an awesome guy. He knows everyone in show business, and he's been a huge supporter of Scary Good Stars, Those American Girls, since before we even started this YouTube channel. So that's something to look forward to, but first I want to tell you this story we got in email form from a guy who told me I'm free to adapt it as much as I need to, since he has difficulty putting his thoughts into words. It's a fascinating story, and it's called The Wolf-Headed Dogman. Dear Scary Stories, I saw a story on your show recently in which you had an animated dogman staring in a window. This video was truly shocking to me because it reminded me of a similar thing that happened to me when I was a kid. That wolf-headed creature you created for that show was more similar to what I saw than anything I have seen before or since. I'm not sure if you've ever seen a dogman, but it's almost as though you saw the creature I saw. Or maybe it wasn't a creature. I wouldn't really know. What I mean by that last part is that I'm not actually certain that what I saw was a living creature, at least not in the sense we think of living creatures. It appeared physical, that's for certain, but was it actually there? How would I even know? It seemed to exist and take up space, but nothing about its behavior seemed at all normal or animal-like. If it was actually alive, it must have been very intelligent, even if it wasn't the same kind of intelligence that we have. The reason I feel that way is that the creature studied me. Let me backtrack a little. I was in a cabin with my dad and mom, and this was before my sister was born, so the oldest I could have been was 7. We were way out in the woods, but I don't remember where, and that was the only time I ever remember us going to that place. I mostly remember it being a fun time, but on our last night there, I woke up in the middle of the night and couldn't get back to sleep. I got out of my bed and wandered over to my parents, but decided not to try to wake them for whatever reason. Then I wandered out to the main room, and there it was, looking in the window, just the same as in your story. It was that exact same kind of a thing. The head was that of a wolf, and the body was like a heavily muscled man with long claws at the ends of his fingers. It was much larger than a man, and I remember when I told my parents about it in the morning, I called it the Giant Dog Man. I'd never heard of Dogman. This was the mid-1970s, but I was just saying it was giant, it was a dog, and it was a man. Giant Dog Man. My parents didn't take it seriously, of course, and they kidded me about it for years. I suppose these days that would be viewed as bad parenting, but my generation were a bit tougher skinned, I guess. In fact, a big reason I remember the story at all is that my parents kept bringing it up over and over for decades. When I would make a mistake, they would say I saw another giant dog man. When they thought I was lying to get out of trouble, they would ask me, "Are you seeing giant dogmen again?" But the thing about all the kidding is, no matter how many times they did it, each time I could vividly picture the creature or entity just as I had seen it that first night. I know for a fact that I saw what I saw. I don't know, of course, if it actually existed outside of me, or in what sense it existed. They say kids can see things that adults can't, and I'm pretty certain I saw something essentially real. Now that I'm an adult, though, maybe I wouldn't be able to see it anymore. Maybe if my parents had come out of bed that night, they might not have seen what I could see. I'll never know. But I saw it. What was it? It was as large as a bear, but bears don't stare into a window at a kid for hours. It was too large to be a man in a costume. Was it a ghost? Was it from another dimension? Was it some kind of Jungian archetypal figure? Was it a manifestation of the great god Pan? You know, in ancient cultures, when they would see things like Bigfoot, they would refer to them as just that, manifestations of Pan. In Egypt, they spoke about summoning Bigfoot, which they called Thoth's ape. I bet you want to know how they summoned Bigfoot. Well, it's not something I can talk about on YouTube, but you need a young woman, and it needs to be a certain time of the month. That's about all I can say without getting this channel in trouble, but you can Google it if you're more interested. So, I stared at the monster, and the monster stared at me. The next morning, I asked my mom if it was a monster from Where the Wild Things Are, that kid's book. It was as big as one of those things. So, the dogman never looked angry at me. I never saw its teeth. I never heard it growl. It just stared at me in amazement and wonder with that same expression on its face as your animated character had. Anyway, I just felt compelled to write to you and tell you you really tapped a nerve in me with that video. I don't think what I saw is common, because I've never seen a drawing or photo that looked like what I saw until I saw your video. That's another reason I wonder about the nature of that thing. What is the Dogman? And why is it here? Thank you for airing my memories. Stay tuned. Up next, we got a story of a bizarre cryptid told by the king of pop culture himself, Gary Sohmers.
I saw the beast of Truro. As told to Peter Bernard. Read by Gary Sohmers. Back in 1981, I was 21 and trying to get into comedy. A friend of my mother owned a nightclub in Cape Cod and told me he'd let me do stand-up at off-peak hours if I took a job as a busboy for the summer. I wasn't going to be able to get good bookings until I built a name for myself, so I figured Cape Cod would be as good a place as any for me to go to make mistakes and teach myself how to be a decent comedian. What I didn't figure is that the job would cause me to come in contact with a legendary monster. By the end of summer, I was the opening and closing act for the club on most nights, and they asked me to stay on a bit longer, through the beginning of October. I had no better offers, so one September night, I was taking my break outside the club, and I spotted the largest cat I had ever seen in my life. It was stalking something and hiding in the shadows. It was unmistakably huge for a cat. Like not bear size or anything, but it looked 4 times as big as a house cat. It was smaller than a man, but I bet it could take out a small human if it were hungry enough. I watched for a few minutes, I would guess, as it eventually pounced on whatever it was chasing, some small mammal. Its prey got out of its grasp and bounced off, and the cat pursued. While chasing the smaller creature, the cat passed through an area about 1 or 2 feet wide that was illuminated by lights from the club. I could see it was colored sort of like a lion. That completely freaked me out, until a few days later when I got to the library and looked up mountain lions. We didn't have Google back then. It was a lot harder to access information in those days. At any rate, what I saw was a mountain lion. I have never reported my sighting to anyone, but I saw in the papers that other people had seen the thing, and it got the name, the Beast of Truro. It was credited with killing family pets and farm animals. The beast was kind of a big deal back then, at least locally. I think it got picked up on the national news for a while, too. Most of my friends from those days heard me do a routine about the animal in my act, so they think it was just part of the gag. The truth is, I actually saw the creature. I absolutely know 100% what it was. It was a cougar, or mountain lion. The problem is, the scientists claim that such things are extinct in the eastern United States. So when someone reports one, they are told that they didn't see what they saw, and that leads to names like the Beast of Truro being created, because according to science, cougars don't exist there. This makes no sense at all to me. If I found a way to travel to Mars and signal Earth, it would be discounted as urban legend because everyone knows I don't live on Mars. I live in Massachusetts. So then the people who got my signal would get marginalized, and I would become the Beast from Mars. I think this is why fewer and fewer people give a hoot what experts say about anything. Whether the cougar exists in books about Cape Cod or not, all I know is that fall, a cougar was in Massachusetts, killing and eating things. I don't need a book to tell me it's true, because my own eyes saw the Beast of Truro.
Don't go away. We've got about 40 minutes of Dr. Death stories coming next, all voiced by PQ River. And it starts right after this.
I hear there's a celebrity with the initials GG appearing at the next Northeast Comic-Con.
Is it Gina Gershon?
What? No.
Is it Greg Grunberg?
Greg which?
Greta Garbo?
The Westport Wild Man, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ River. Back in the summer of 1950 or 51, when I was 15 or 16 years old, I broke my parents' rules and snuck out one night when they thought I was asleep to party with friends I was banned from seeing. I didn't just see my friends that night, though. I also saw a man-animal hybrid from the dawn of time, a fellow that my friends and I called the Westport Wild Man. For the sake of this story, let's call one of my friends Joe. He lived in Freetown, near me at the time. And let's call the other Mo. Now, Mo's family were spending the summer with richer relatives who lived down in a part of Westport overlooking water. I never actually saw the place, but it sounded nice from the descriptions I'd heard. Anyway, part of the deal with Mo staying at his relative's place was that he was no longer grounded. He could roam where he wanted to as long as he stayed away from me and Joe, who were seen by his parents as bad influences. Mo had been wandering into this natural area just south of the bioreserve over there, and on more than one occasion he claimed he had seen a hairy ape man. Now, this was years before I had heard of Bigfoot, but there were lots of ape men in movies. Maybe they were supposed to be gorillas, but they were guys in suits. So that's what I envisioned when I heard Mo describe what he had seen. Since Mo said he only ever saw the Monster Man right around sunset, we figured if we were going to hunt for him, it should be at night. We set a date 2 weeks into the future so that we could give ourselves the time to work out the logistics of how we would break our grounding without being discovered. For those 2 weeks, I went to bed earlier each night and got up earlier each day. Both my parents were early risers, so not only did they notice this new behavior, but they congratulated me for it and were nicer to me for a while. Then, on the night in question, I went to bed at 9, locked my door, and exited through the bedroom window to go hunt the Monkey Man. Now, although the Westport Wild Man was our nickname for the creature, the area in which it was seen was actually north of Westport, I'm pretty sure. I'm looking at a Google map as I'm writing this, and I'm not 100% certain which of the green areas I'm looking at is the correct one, or if it even exists any longer. My memory tells me it was an area south of the bioreserve, but Google seems to be labeling all these green areas as the bioreserve, so I'm not really certain. At any rate, we met at a pre-designated place and time, then Mo led us to the spot where he'd seen the ape man twice. It was dark there. It was very dark there. We weren't even in the trees yet, just in this tall grass that I didn't realize was loaded with ticks I'd be pulling off my body half the next day. Mo said, "Give your eyes a minute to adjust to the light." But they never really did. You know why? Because it was really dark there. After a minute or two, Joe started moaning that we needed to go back and get a flashlight or just forget about this. His voice sounded really scared. I hadn't been frightened up to that point, but hearing Joe sound quavery voiced made me feel scared too. Mo sighed heavily at both of us and produced a flashlight from his pocket. He held it low and pointed it at the ground between us. "I have a flashlight with me, as you two quivering little lambs can see," Mo mocked us. "But are you sure you want to use it?" We quickly said yes and began grabbing for the light from his hands. He pulled it back from us, careful to keep its light confined to a small area directly beneath us. "Before you make up your mind to use this flashlight," he admonished us, "you should know the drawbacks of using it." That got our attention, and we listened to him quietly. "1," he began, "it will not only light up the forest for ourselves, but for anyone or anything else that might be here with us. And 2, it will alert that aforementioned anything else to where we are." "So?" asked Joe. "So," answered Mo. "Then it can kill and eat us more easily." The silence was deafening as we considered what Mo said. Then Joe snatched the flashlight away, saying something like, "It still beats this. At least we'll see what's eating me." Once the light was his, Joe swung it wildly around, and for the first time I got a clear look at the tree line about 90 or 100 feet past us. It was around the distance from home plate to first base, at least in my memory. There was a solid wall of trees extending past the light of the flashlight to the left and right. After swaying back and forth for a few seconds, Joe centered the flashlight on the hairy figure standing there. There was a man-shaped figure standing there, perfectly still. I remember gasping so hard that I choked myself, and Joe let the flashlight drop from his grip. I caught it before it hit the ground and immediately aimed it back at the figure who had not moved. It was still standing perfectly still, so I just aimed the light, squinted my eyes, and tried to take in as much detail as possible. The tall grass was blocking off everything below his knees, but he at first appeared to be covered in fur except on his face and on his hands, which he held perfectly still, hanging from his sides. His proportions were roughly human. His arms may have been a little longer than mine, but they were not ape arms. And why was there no fur on the back of his hands? As I continued to study his appearance, I noticed he had long black hair coming from the top of his head and going down on either side like Veronica Lake or someone, but dirty and matted with lots of split ends. He also appeared to have a beard, so he was not an ape, no matter how far his brow seemed to protrude from his forehead. His skin was very tanned, but something like Caucasian or possibly Native American skin. His features resembled neither. In short, he was something impossible that could not have been there. And he still hadn't moved. I felt a wave of relief as I became convinced this was just a gag. It was a dummy. Mo had erected a dummy, and he had made dummies of me and Joe. I started laughing and told Mo I got the joke. Mo just looked confused. He told me it wasn't a joke. I said if it's not a joke then, why hadn't the ape man moved? I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it back to the same spot on the tree line to illustrate my point. The ape man was no longer there. The three of us reacted in unison, all shouting and cursing and grabbing for the flashlight. I pulled it away and scanned back and forth until I found the ape man. He was walking towards us. He was now halfway to us. I could see now that he was not an ape. He was wearing a fur skin wrapped tightly around his upper torso. His hair hung low down his back. He was not an ape. He was a primitive proto-human wearing possibly bear skin. As we watched, he bared his teeth and emitted a guttural, growling sound. Then he started to run at us while growling. I would love to regale you with the specifics of how three imbecilic 15 or 16-year-old kids from Massachusetts evaded a furious caveman as he chased them in pitch darkness through tall grass and back to civilization, but I literally do not remember any part of the rest of the story. I have deduced that we got away, since I am not dead yet as I type this. How exactly we did it, though, is anyone's guess. I never asked Joe or Mo about their side of the story, and they're both gone now for years. So this is the interactive part of the story, as you get to choose your own conclusion. Did we turn around and beat him up? Did he stop running and let us get away? Was he only trying to scare us off of his turf? Did he capture us and beam us up to his spacecraft, perform intrusive and unnecessary surgery on us, then erase our memories, leaving us with missing time? Your guess is as good as mine. For all I know, it really was a joke that Mo cooked up with a friend of his. The caveman was larger than us, but he didn't seem to be larger than man-sized. It could have been one of Mo's bigger friends from town or something. Maybe he was just wearing half a gorilla suit and a Don Post caveman mask. I don't know, and I suspect I never will know. But in my gut, I'll tell you, I think what we saw that night was what my generation used to call the missing link, or the creature that came between apes and man on the evolutionary ladder. I think we survived a genuine attack by a prehistoric caveman less than 100 miles away from Boston, Massachusetts. That's my story, and no matter what you say, I say it's true. The end. The Flying Pig of Pittsburgh, as told to Peter Bernard, read by P.Q. Ribber. I've been listening to your show for a while. I like to hear stories about monsters in the New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania areas. I'm in my 80s now, but when I was younger, I used to hunt all through those regions. I experienced some strange nights, but the only time I can claim with absolute certainty that I saw a monster was this night in the late 1950s, when I was hunting with my late brother in this wild area near Oakdale or Rennerdale. We kept hearing what sounded like wild boar in the underbrush, but when we would advance closer to the area, we would then hear the pig noises coming from a different direction. The fourth or fifth time it happened, I remember my brother getting spooked. He said there was something wrong, something off about what was happening. There was no way boar could change their location that quickly, and even if they ran, we would hear them running. And then, as he finished saying that, we heard the pig noises from yet another direction. Now, I was getting scared too. I asked him if he wanted to give up and go home, acting like I was only going home for his benefit. Then he said no, and I changed my tune fast, insisting we get out of there at once. Maybe there are lots of boars, I suggested. Maybe they've surrounded us, and maybe they are hunting us. Before I could finish expressing that idea, we were both heading back in the direction we came. The pig noises continued now and then, but mostly seemed to be coming from further and further behind us. We finally started relaxing and slowing down a bit, laughing at how frightened we had been just a little while earlier. Then a huge, wild, hairy boar fell out of the sky and landed with a thud in front of us. We both screamed and fell on our butts, and if I recall the story correctly, we both relieved ourselves right then and there. It was a pig, but as it got itself up off the ground, it proceeded to continue standing up and up and up until it stood on two legs like a man. This hairy pig was part man, and then it screamed. Or maybe screeched. It sounded like it was being gored alive. It sounded in pain, but I think it was just angry. And then the most impossible part of the story happened. The pig man grew wings. I just saw these bat wings flap from its back, then it flapped its wings furiously, taking off into the night. Dust and dirt were kicked up and got in our eyes and in our noses and down our throats, and we were coughing and dry heaving and clearing our eyes for some time after the pigman had departed. Once we recovered a bit, we recommenced our egress post-haste and made it back to civilization with no further incident. Whenever I tell this story, and I've told it a lot in the 60 or so years since it happened, people ask me if the incident put me off hunting. Absolutely not. I reasoned that seeing something like a flying pigman is a privilege unlikely to happen to the same person twice in one lifetime. I was correct about that, too, as I never saw or heard that creature or anything even vaguely like it ever again. Now that I'm old, I never know when I tell the story, if it's the last time I'll tell it. So I figure it was about time to hand the story on and get someone professional like PQ Ribber to read an official public version of it. Thanks in advance for putting my story on the air. The Pig-Nosed Man in My Window. As told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. Dear Scary Stories. I have been searching the internet looking for something like what happened to me when I was a kid, but so far I haven't found anything like it at all. Now I'm asking around on different forums and places online to see if anyone ever had anything like this happen to them. When I was a kid, I would be visited just before dawn by a pig-nosed man who would look at me through my bedroom window while hanging upside down from my roof. If it hasn't happened to you, then I guess that might sound weird, but it went on nearly every night from when I was 4 or 5 until I was 11 years old. There were some nights he didn't seem to show up and other nights that I didn't wake up till after the sun was already up, but usually I woke up to go to the bathroom between 4 and 5 a.m., and I would say hello to him each time. He would never say hello back. He would just look at me. He had small black eyes placed very far apart, a mouth I don't remember ever seeing open, and the largest nostrils I ever saw in my life pointing straight forward. I only ever saw him in the dark, so I don't know if his nose looked like that normally or if it was because he might have been pressing his nose against the window. One time I turned on my bedroom light to see him better and momentarily blinded myself in the process. When I'd adjusted to the new light in the room, he was now gone from the window. Other times I would walk up to the window in the dark and squint to try to understand better what I was seeing. I think his nose really looked like that. A large nostriled, upturned nose, unlike anything I've seen on a human before. That's why, as a kid, I called him the Pig-Nosed Man. I would talk about him to my parents and sister, but they wouldn't really react. I found out years later they thought I was imagining all of this and were trying to ignore me until I grew out of it. I think my sister probably still believes that it was just my imagination. If I was imagining him, I supplied myself with a lot of imaginary detail. The last 2 years I saw him, he had started to look old. His hair on his chin was turning whiter and whiter through the months. When he wouldn't show up for a night, I would worry about him. When he finally did stop hanging out, I was very stressed and concerned for a while. I think it was a few weeks, but this is almost 20 years ago now, so I can't be sure. When it finally sank in that he really wasn't coming back, I got very sad and cried almost through this one weekend. At dinner on Sunday, we had our rich Uncle Benny over, and I was still crying over the Pig-Nosed Man. Finally, my sister asked loudly in front of everybody what I was moping about. I told her that the Pig-Nosed Man was dead, and she literally did a spit take, spitting creamed spinach all over Uncle Benny's new rent-a-girlfriend. Sis, Uncle Benny, and the escort du jour all went to the bathroom to de-spinach this woman we never saw before and would never see again. Dad and Mom asked me quietly to tell them more about the pig-faced man, so I said he was dead and began bawling, finally able to talk to someone about the deep loss I felt. "I thought you told me he was dreaming all that," my father said accusingly to my mother. Mom got mad and she exploded. "Well, maybe if you'd let me take those psychology courses I've been asking you to let me take, then I would have known he was real. Did you ever think that?" Long story made short, both my parents now wondered what kind of kid gets stalked by a pervert who watches him sleep for 6 years, then cries when the creep dies. I got stuck in weekly meetings with an idiot of a psychiatrist, then badgered a few times a week about how expensive the moron psychiatrist was. At 18, I left town for college, mainly to get away from having to go to the shrink weekly to assuage my parents' guilt at leaving me exposed to a predator nightly for 6 years. The thing is, I don't think I ever saw him as any sort of predator or pervert. He was a friend of mine. He only hung out because he was curious, and I was just as curious about him. He had the strangest hair on his head, more like fur almost. He had the largest ears, too. He never stayed until the sun came up, so I never got a very good look at him. I never saw his hands or body, and I have no idea how he would arrive and leave, since I never heard anyone either climbing the wall outside my room or walking around on the roof. I don't think he was a regular man. I think he was something else. Maybe he was a one-of-a-kind creature, or the last of his kind. If anyone out there has had an experience anything like this, please let me know about it. The Freetown Flyer is told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. Dear Scary Stories, I'm not going to tell you who I am, except to say that I was born and lived my entire life in the area between Freetown and Fall River, Massachusetts. For those of you not from around here, that's an area which still, to this day, includes protected land, which has been wild forest and swamp since before the time of the dinosaurs. There are a number of legends originating from both Native American and settler cultures about this spot that go back as far as you can imagine, and further than you might have thought possible. Today I'm going to tell you about two things that happened to me, personally, when I was a teenager. My uncle, who claimed to be a shaman, told me when I was very young that my family are descended from both English settlers, dating back to the Mayflower on one side, and the Wampanoag native people on the other. He took me around the forests and towns and showed me many things, such as the Dighton Rock, which he gave me the translation of, or at least the translation handed down to him by the man who trained him. According to what he told me, the rock was not carved by the Wampanoag people, but by people who lived here before them. He told me a story about a shaman, many generations ago, who had a dream in which it was explained to him that the rock depicts both the origin story of that more ancient people and a mathematical formula for the creation of life given by Tanit to that ancient race. Tanit was and is the great spirit who is dreaming this reality we inhabit. With his blessing, the two tribes then interbred, and their offspring became the Wampanoag. Supposedly, the more primitive and evil tribe they had been battling was driven deep into the Hockomock Swamp, where they may still live to this day. Now, this part of Massachusetts does have a reputation for monsters, but it also is both so remote and so close to major population centers that it also has a reputation for attracting the human kinds of monsters as well, such as gangsters wanting a nice, quiet place to commit murder, and Satanists wanting a nice, quiet place to, well, let's not talk about it. A lot of people think that devil worship, blood sacrifice stuff started in the 1960s, but my grandfather told me stories going back to when he was a kid that would just about curl your toenails. Let's just say I'd rather get the swamp monsters mad at me than those people. For this reason, I say, let's only talk about the non-human kinds of monsters today. This first story happened when I was around 15-ish, so let's say 1950 or so. I had two friends that I would skip school with and go to the swamps with and make a day of it. The tricky part was getting to the swamps without being seen by the truant officer or anyone who might alert the truant officer. We only had one in our area, and he'd been on the job since before we were born, so he knew how kids my age thought. He didn't just patrol the main streets, he patrolled every small block and every bunch of houses it was easy to cut through the backyards of. Once we would finally make it to the swamp, we knew we were home free because no civilized adult would go into the swamps if he didn't absolutely have to. That didn't mean we didn't run into people there, but they just weren't civilized. They were savage and free, same as we fancied ourselves to be at the time. But like I said, this isn't a story about humans. So let's jump straight to the meat of the sandwich then. Me and my two buddies, both of whom are now deceased, saw a flying reptile. We saw some kind of pterosaur or a descendant of such a type of leathery winged animal. Here's exactly what happened to the best of my memory, which may be a bit stretched since I've told the story so many times in front of campfires on dark nights. One warm day, it was late May, I believe, my friends and I were having so much fun making each other laugh and so forth that we headed further into the forest than we ever had before, and we suddenly realized that the sun was going down. We had always started back before the sun started to set. Even the latest times we ever left the forest, it was always still light out. This time, even if we beat it out of there quickly as we could, it was going to be dark long before we got out of there. When I told this story to my grandson, he said, "Wow, Grandpa, you guys were screwed." Yes, we were. We knew it too. Panicking, my heart racing faster and faster, I urged the guys to rush as we headed back to safety, but it seemed that they were lagging behind me. I heard them calling to me, but I didn't hear what they were saying. I told them to hurry, and then suddenly I heard two blood-curdling screams, and I was so surprised I ran back into a tree and then fell back on my ass. I sat there, wondering if I had imagined the screams, when suddenly there came two more. Both my friends were screaming in pain or fear. I was on my feet before I knew it, running away from the screams until guilt overtook me and I ran back to where my friends had been screaming. When I reached them, I didn't see anything I could have possibly expected to see. My friends were wrestling with an animal, somewhat larger than either of them, colored dark gray, with leathery skin and a long alligator mouth with terrifying-looking teeth in it. One of my friends had it by the throat and was using his entire body to hold its neck away from biting either of them, and the other had his arms wrapped around the torso of the creature. The three of them were rolling back and forth on the grass, covered in dirt and mud and blood. I wondered, what do I do? And I guess I said it out loud because both of the guys at the same time started screaming at me to bash its head in with a rock. I started looking around at once for the large rock they requested, but you know what life can be like. You curse all the acorns clogging up your house's gutter, but then you can't find any acorns at all when you start craving acorn spätzle. So of course, I couldn't find any large rocks that weren't too big for me to pick up. I started pelting the animal with small rocks, not knowing what else to do. One of them hit my friend holding the torso. He shouted in pain and released his grip, allowing the creature to wriggle away from both of them. Up till now, I really had no idea what they were wrestling with there on the ground. Since it had no fur, I had assumed it was something diseased, maybe something with mange. As it got away from them, it reared up on two legs, and to my shock, unfurled wings to either side of it. These were not bird wings, although their shape was similar. They were more like bat wings, except they were one flap of leather each, not separated into segments like a bat's wings are. It also had a tail I hadn't taken conscious notice of before, and so the overall effect was that I was looking at some sort of man-sized dragon. It had an alligator mouth and a serpent's head on a bird's body, ending in a lizard's tail, and as it started flapping its wings, I realized that it flew. Its first flap created so much wind that I got knocked off balance and dust went in my eyes and down my throat. We three were left choking and gagging on the ground for a while until the dust settled and we realized the bird monster was gone. As soon as they felt a little better, both guys were punching me and yelling at me that I was an idiot and I had lost them the eighth wonder of the world that was going to make us all $1 million. I laughed and asked them which pawn shop was paying $1 million for a flying alligator, and they started yelling at me that it was a dinosaur. A dinosaur? Well, they meant pterosaur, which we all later found out was not technically a dinosaur, but did live back then. Once they said that to me, I wished I could kick and punch myself for letting it get away. That summer we decided we would stalk the big bird and catch it and make a name for ourselves. A good plan, right? Except someone let the plan leak. And once our parents found out we'd been hanging in the swamps hunting wild animals that could have killed us, we were all grounded and not allowed to see each other until school started up again in the fall. It's not to say we didn't sometimes break our parents' rules and sneak out together. In fact, I'm about to tell you a story about one time we did. But we never saw the flying dinosaur monster thing again. I have so many regrets related to that story, they haunt me more than any ghost story ever could. I have one more monster story from that summer to tell, so don't go away.
In the description of this video, we've got a link to our new Scary Stories t-shirt. It's our classic skull logo and it says Scary Stories underneath in the kaiju monster font. It comes in black and also black and other dark colors such as black. Good for ladies or gentlemen, hoodies too, whatever you need. Oh, I also should plug the new Those American Girls album. It's got Madeline Starr on it and Patricia Howdigi and Colleen Great, and all the songs are written by Those American Girls. This one has no cover tracks on it. The title is Those American Girls Turn Off the TV, and you can get it from the link or links in the description.
The Man-Sized Bat, as told to Peter Bernard, read by P.Q. River. Hey, Scary Stories. Here's a story for P.Q. River to read. It's about a hairy monster, but not Bigfoot. I hadn't thought of it in years, but when I saw that your writer, Peter Bernard, is appearing at a comic convention with Pete and Pete, it jogged this memory back to the front of my mind. It seems that a lot of times, when people see strange cryptid-type monster animals, it's when they're camping, or for some reason, out way beyond the edge of civilization. Half the story is about how they got to their location and how far away it was from the closest town or whatever. My story skips all that boring stuff because I found my monster in my own backyard in New Jersey. This story took place in Leonia, New Jersey, in whatever year they shot the first season of Nickelodeon's Pete and Pete on Woodridge Place. I lived north of there, and I attended the Leonia Middle School at that time. We were right up near where they now have the animatronic dinosaur theme park, which seems particularly ironic and bizarre, since what I saw may have in fact been some sort of prehistoric creature. Back in the 90s, I would have loved to live a few blocks from animatronic dinosaurs. As for real living monsters outside my window, that I'm not so sure I enjoyed. My block was all private homes with backyards. We had 3 fairly old trees in our yard and 1 tree house in the tallest and oldest one. The tree nearest my window was old enough that it went up past the roof of our home, and lots of creatures lived in it. That summer, for whatever reason, a man-sized flying creature took up residence there as well. When I say took up residence, I guess that's not entirely accurate. He or it would sort of chill out in the tree, hanging upside down for a while, before flying off again to do I do not know what. If it was really a bat, then I suppose wherever it stayed during the day would be its true address. I'm not sure it was actually a bat, though. The first time I saw it, I didn't think bat at all. I thought I saw a pterodactyl. I had been staring out the window, enjoying a warm June evening, when out of the darkness of the tree closest to my window, a loud flapping sound, coupled with loud movement of leaves, erupted, terrifying me momentarily. I looked in the direction of the tree in time to see a huge thing with bat-like wings fly away quickly. We had just seen Jurassic Park either days or weeks earlier, so dinosaurs were on my mind. My friends and I had been talking about why there weren't pterosaurs in the movie, and it had been on my mind a lot. So that's why when I saw bat-like wings, my first thought was dinosaur instead of bat. The next night, my friend Steve from school stayed over and brought his Sony Betamax video camera with him. We both fell asleep standing guard by the window when suddenly something screeched like a predator outside the window, waking us both up with a start. Steve started filming, but all he ended up getting was us both screaming, "Did you see that?" accompanied by visuals of the room lights reflecting off the bedroom window. I asked Steve to lend me his camera, but he said it was really his dad's, so that was out. I begged my parents for a video camera, but for some reason they didn't think it was wise to spend hundreds of dollars to shoot video of our backyard at night. For the next few weeks I stood guard by my window anyway. I would see him almost every night, probably about 5 times a week. Gradually I got a better sense of what I was looking at, and it was not a pterodactyl, or at least not one like they had in books back then. It was a furry creature with bat wings, a short tail, bug ears, and a face that looked like a cross between a man and a pig. That's kind of what it really looked like, if a bat, a pig, and a human all had a baby. The idea sprang into my head. Is this the real monster behind the Jersey Devil? This had the bat wings that the devil is supposed to have, but it definitely did not have a horse head like old Mr. Leeds. When it would fly off, I would wonder where it went. If it was a bat, then it must have flown off to hunt or to suck blood, as those are the main ways bats eat. I wonder what that thing would hunt, and shuddered at the thought. At that moment, I was glad I didn't own any small pets, as I didn't think they'd be safe living there any longer. By later in August, he, or she, didn't appear 3 nights in a row, and I started sleeping in my bed again instead of by the window. I'm not 100% sure it stopped coming around, but I know that I soon forgot about it. That's the thing about life. You can encounter the deepest and most fascinating mystery you'll ever see, but then soon enough it's time to go shopping for new school clothes and notebooks, and to have your sense of wonder pounded out of you for another few months until Christmas time. I feel like I should end it as though I were on Reddit, like, "Hey, Mr. Giant Bat in a Tree Man, let's not meet again." But in truth, I'd love to get another look at that guy, whoever or whatever he or she was, or else I'd love to hear of someone else making a similar sighting. It's hard for me to believe I've grown into an adult and yet never heard another story about a man-sized bat flying around New Jersey, or anywhere else for that matter. Surely someone must know what that thing was. Surely someone besides me must have seen it.
My world, everyone's a pony, and they all eat rainbows and poop butterflies.
That's beautiful, Katie.
Come back for more scary stories.